Hello and welcome. My name is Father William Maestri, and this is Overfed and Undernourished. In this edition, we turn our attention to the rise of the new iconoclast. The word icon means an image, a statue, some representation. It could be a painting, a work of art, of some person, place, thing, or event that wants to be remembered or memorialized. The idea of memorials or the idea of statues or some kind of artifact have been around since humankind has walked the earth and left various records. In one form or another, human beings have felt the need to leave some remembrance or some proof or some record of great people, great events, good and bad, for what took place in their particular time, or to remember what happened previously that brought them to the time in which they find themselves. The idea of an icon is very prevalent in the Bible. In fact, the first commandment has to do with forbidding the idea of making images and worshiping these idols and false gods. It's the first and the greatest of the commandment, to love the living God with one's whole being, and to shun and to have nothing to do with idols or those images of false gods from their perspective. And it was not uncommon when communities or tribes would come into battle with one another, that right after whoever won would begin to destroy the images of the gods of the defeated people, or certainly those remembrances of any of their moments that they cherished and wanted to pass on to future generations. They destroyed them. In the New Testament, one of the great affronts to the Jewish people during the time of Jesus, the Romans placed the image of Caesar in the temple, because they considered Caesar to be a kind of demigod, whoever the emperor was. And this was a terrible abomination to the Jewish nation and, of course, to the Jewish faith. If we fast forward several centuries, we find that during the time of the Reformation, where there were conflicts between Catholics and Protestants, a great deal of destruction was done to statues, to churches, to various images of God, of the saints. Also, the Puritans were very much opposed to any kind of image or any kind of representation of God, and certainly of the saints, or any kind of holy statues, or those kinds of things that obviously Catholics and still some Protestants held on to. So they were very much opposed to that. Now, if we fast forward to today, a very important distinction needs to be made, and it's one I wish more people would make. When we memorialize something, when we build a memorial, the idea is taken uncritically that we do this in order to celebrate, emulate, and therefore to copy, to imitate. That's one form, certainly. When we say, I'm going to have a memorial made to me, it's an honor. It's a way of inviting others to acknowledge what the person did or the event was momentous, but also to inspire future generations. But lost in the conversation is the idea that memorials are not simply built in order to celebrate. They're also built to teach. And in this case, to teach what not to do, what not to engage in, what to avoid. Memorials also serve that kind of instructive process that takes place. And therefore, one can indeed build a memorial that teaches us what not to do. The one that comes to my mind that I visited in Washington, D.C., is the Holocaust Museum. Now, the Holocaust Museum is a museum which reveals, as it does, in chilling and in stark fashion man's inhumanity to man, the depth of evil that some men and some ideologies and some political regimes will go in order to achieve their ends. The brutality and just the general evil is truly satanic and demonic, the depths. Now, I don't think any rational person, maybe if they do, they're not rational, but I don't think anyone would support taking down the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., because it might advocate the glories of Nazism. On its face, that's insane. And therefore, we do have those kinds of museums which show the depravity and the other debasement that human beings can go to in order to inflict terrible suffering and death and mass murders on others. Elie Wiesel, one of the towering figures not only of the 20th century, but of any century, Nobel Prize winner. He is a Holocaust survivor and has written numerous books, prize-winning books and articles on the Holocaust. And he says continually in every one of his writings and his appearances, we must never forget. We must remember. Because when we forget and we are very much capable of falling back into the very depravity that makes such episodes in human history possible. Never forget, never forget. That really is the byword of someone who lived through the Holocaust and suffered a great deal, his family and his loved ones. And that museum is there to remind us that all museums and all monuments are not necessarily celebrations, but they're there to instruct the present and future generations of what to avoid, the dangers when fanaticism, totalitarianism, when brutality comes to the forefront of power, the dehumanization that can take place. And so I think if we look at the current situation in terms of this mania to destroy museums, to destroy monuments, what do we see? We see that it is devoid of any kind of reason. It is simply passion-driven. And when that happens, the first casualties are truth and reason. They're the first to go. And what happens is the passions take over and indiscriminate destruction takes place. In other words, when the mob is set free to indiscriminately destroy, there's no sense of proportion, no sense of teaching, no sense of getting deeper, more enduring lessons of what not to do, because that part is destroyed. But seldom, if ever, is there any suggestion of what is to take its place, other than some kind of airy slogan or some kind of talking point that takes place. But notice how it metastasizes, please. We start off with the Confederacy and the idea of slavery and the South and the flag and all of the symbols that go with the Confederacy and the Civil War. Then it goes over into someone who was touched by slavery in any kind of way, shape, or form back during that particular time. So we stand in the 21st century and condemn what happened in the 18th, 19th century. And we judge them harshly and say that they deserve no recognition because of many of the good things they may have done. Their life is not taken in a totality. It's not a film, it's a snapshot. And few of us want to be judged by a single snapshot in time of our worst moments, nor our best moments are also not valid for judging the whole of the person. Yet that's exactly what is happening and has happened. We also want to get rid of political figures, their statues and memorials of a bygone era that may disagree with our particular politics, our particular ideology or belief system today. They must be eradicated. We must get rid of them. And now we've moved to the elimination of religious figures, the tearing down or the removal of, for example, in California, Father Junipero Serra, who did so much to bring Christianity to this part of the West, the western part of the United States, which wasn't the United States at the time, but to the territories, bringing Christianity. Were there abuses and controversies about what took place by the missionaries? Of course. But that's not the totality. We are dealing today in slices rather than with the whole of the pie. And that's unfortunate because, once again, we're committing a kind of memory lobotomy. Find that part, hold that up, and then destroy it. But all of the things we could learn from what these people learned, what they achieved and brought about, that is completely missed. It's amazing that we've gone from eliminating Jefferson Davis and Stonewall Jackson, Robert E. Lee, and others from the South, P.T. Beauregard, etc., to the idea of Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, and people who, it's hard to see the connection there, because I don't think there is a connection, frankly, between what is taking place and the elimination of these. There has to be some deeper currents at work here. And I have no idea to know for certain, but there is a kind of willingness now in certain segments to simply remake America, tear it down, get rid of its ideals, its values, its aspirations, its achievements, and to replace it with what? That is so unclear, and that is so dangerous. To lose your memory without any sense of a future leaves us aimless and chaotic, which is what we see in the present. It's what we see in the present moment. And I must admit that I am deeply disappointed. I'm deeply disappointed in the vacuum of leadership that has arisen at this particular time. I'm talking about our politicians, and I have a list here, politicians. Politicians, it seems that their number one goal is to win the next election. No sooner are they elected than they begin campaigning. What about the common good? What about the oath to uphold the laws of the United States, of their communities, of their states? This idea that our political leaders we see now scurrying, falling all over each other, to outdo one another in appeasing the passions of the moment. Well, you don't appease passions. They only grow in hunger. They only grow in demands. They only become more fortified, more vocal, and more demanding. Appeasement is not the answer. Courage, belief in the rule of law, the establishment of order, those are important things that leadership calls for. And at the present time, our political leaders are totally and woefully absent in this great hour of a very serious moment in American history and in American culture that's taking place. I am incredibly disappointed in the media. The media has become incredibly partisan and in many ways hypocritical. The people who are looting and burning, destroying, causing injury and in some cases death, disrupting so many innocent families and people, they are referred to as protesters, and they tend to be blended in with people who are exercising their rights. This is a very dangerous thing because these are the images that people see night after night, and the way in which it's framed, the way in which it's presented. What does the burning down of establishments, businesses, and places of residence inside faraway cities and places, or even within Minneapolis itself, what does that have to do with what occurred there? How does that heal? How does that rectify? How does that construct? We are left with destruction, increased unemployment, terrible suffering, and not one step forward, other than politicians falling all over themselves to give us these kinds of laws, which very often are meaningless, but they seem to believe that it satisfies the moment. It satisfies the moment. I'm very disappointed in the entertainment and sports industry. We have entertainers and athletes coming forward and putting their status and their reputation, their public images behind some of the most destructive and outlandish forms of so-called solutions. Defund the police. Defund the police is no fun if at 2 a.m. your house is being broken into, your wife is being raped, you're being attacked, your family is in danger of being murdered, your house is being burned down. Well, if you want to defund the police, I'm not sure who you call. Who do you call? One of the protesters? Yes, one of the protesters. I imagine you're not going to get a very good response. This is just mass mob rule and insanity. That's the only thing you can call it. It makes absolutely no sense. It's a further erosion of civil society and of civil order, which is necessary for achieving just change. You must have order so that this kind of change and process can take place. That's not possible when you attack the fundamental element of civil order, the police, and those who are entrusted with enforcing the law. They are the men and women on the ground, entrusted in that difficult task of enforcing laws. Whether they like them or not, they have to enforce them. And I'm very disappointed in our religious leaders. It has to be said. I think that our religious leaders have a kind of collective case of laryngitis. Where is the moral teaching? I don't want more outrage. I don't want outrage or some kind of saccharine or pablum being given as if somehow there's a kind of moral equivalency here. What are the teachings of our faiths, the great faiths that have helped to build this country? The dignity of the human person, made in the image and likeness of God. All human life is sacred. All people are made in the image and likeness of God. Where is the call for order and for justice? Where is the call for true contrition and reformation, for principles of justice applied to change that needs to take place? We have religious leaders pontificating about table grapes and letters, about how many bullets are safe inside of a gun, of which they know nothing, by the way, and so many host of other things, papers and papers and papers. And on this serious issue, again, the silence is deafening. The silence is deafening. Again, where this is a moment when we need the pastors, the leaders, the teachers to teach. This is the so-called much valued teachable moment, because memorials and situations like this are not to celebrate. They are only to teach us what is dangerous when we go down certain paths. And we are, at this moment, heading down a very, very difficult path. And it's something that requires real leadership across the culture and across society. So the new iconoclast, those who advocate the destruction of our statues, our memorials, and so on, they're very old. Everything old is new again, or as Harry Truman said, everything new is the history you've forgotten or never knew. And so that's what we have today. This is nothing new. It's simply in different language, different ideology, different garb. But the new iconoclast, they are much better at tearing down than they are at building up. And please remember that as human beings, we are communities of memory and communities of hope. We need both of those if we are to navigate our present. We need to remember who we were, where we have come from, in order to have that hopeful future to go into. This is a time of testing. It's a time of conscience and a time of clear moral voice. May, pray God, those voices arise.